But there's still the question of, is wisdom just these capacities to get at whatever goals you happen to have, or are there some kind of, constraints on which goals?
Sure. So, I mean, the only reason why
can the mob boss be wise,
Yeah, so that's tough because I guess I would say two things. One is, I made that comment about relativism because the moment that you say something is not one thing, some people take you to be meaning it's everything, or in which case it's nothing. But, more than one does not mean everything. It can mean more than one, so some. And you're asking, is it this or is it this? When you ask the question about the mob boss, this is the whole issue of getting along versus getting ahead. Some of us may feel it's immoral to kill someone under any circumstances. Some of us may feel it's immoral under many or most circumstances, but sometimes it's justified. Some people have no, qualms about it. So what you're asking, I think, is a difficult question to answer because your goals, different people vary in how much other people figure into their goals, this whole getting along.
Well, I mean,
versus
there's an
getting ahead
ethical question here.
Yeah.
I mean, by definition, are we saying that a wise person is a good person?
Well, I mean, I tend to, I guess, I'm not like wedded to Aristotle, but I am in that tradition when it comes to virtues. So I tend to think wisdom is a virtue word. It's a word we use to praise people and to, when we talk about virtues, those are the things we want to inculcate in our kids and teach students to develop. And so I tend to think Tony Soprano was not wise. I mean, he was knowledgeable, and maybe people don't watch, it's an old show, but this is the first thing that came to my mind was or The Godfather, That's not wisdom, because wisdom does have some connection to ethical goodness. It doesn't have to be as tight as absolutist as Aristotle's connection, but I think it has to be something ethical.
Yeah.
Philip?
Yeah, I actually have a preliminary point, or rather a question I want to raise. How common is wisdom? My sense is that real wisdom is pretty rare. That it's not something that you can talk about, lots of little children having, or lots of middle-aged people having, or lots of old people having. I think the standards for being wise are pretty demanding, and so I felt a little queasy when I heard you talking about all these sort of nicely adaptive people who were doing who were getting along and getting their goals. I agree with Valerie about two things here. One is that I think that there's a sense that you're not wise if you just know how to get what your goals, if your goals are somehow all askew. And that getting the right goals, or getting even the right goals for you, is an ethical matter. This isn't something that Tony Soprano or the Godfather has. It's actually, I think, quite demanding. And so I think we should start perhaps with the idea of the sage or the saint, and think of those as our examples of wisdom, and then decide how much leeway we want to give the lesser folk.
I just follow up on one thing. So I guess what I would say is I wasn't necessarily saying that. I actually agree with Valerie in the sense I actually also understand wisdom in my own life. I wish it were only being wise to be good. But I think, in the Jewish tradition, you can be an atheist and still be a really good Jew because you just ask the question. So I think while my preference is that there's some aspect of morality built into wisdom, I think it's worth being able to talk about the possibility that it isn't. I'm not saying that I personally come down on that side, but sometimes it's worth being able to have a discussion about whether or not Tony Soprano is there are some cultures which are very collectivist, and there are some where any kind of individualism would be considered unwise. But there are also cultures which are even more individualistic than we are as a culture when we're,
Let's play that out a little bit.
Yeah.
So what does wisdom mean if we throw ethics out the window? I mean, What is that?
Can I
there's a
interrupt on
Yeah,
that because I was going to say I think that's really interesting and that's a good. I think it's a really neat thing to think about. But we to talk about that question, we need to. What do you mean by ethical? Because there's Tony Soprano. Okay, he murdered some people, but he also went to a shrink. He was good to his kids. He wasn't the best husband in the world, but he wasn't terrible. Then you have, people who are just who are addicted to drugs and are stealing their parents' furniture and money from their friends' wallets, who are throwing their lives away. And you have people who are not saints or sages, but who are doing decently, being good partners to their partners and parents to their children and kids to their parents. So where is the line at which we say, well, that's no longer ethical? I guess I'm pretty broad about it, so I tend to think if we're using the word ethical, it's, maybe Tony Soprano's kind of on the cusp, or maybe he's, he's probably over there. I don't remember the show that well.
Yeah.
But lots of us who are not perfect we're still ethical, so we could still achieve wisdom.